My name is Jason J. Rock Houston, and my co-host, as always, is Vince Lupo, and we're doing Remembering Woodstock today, and we're into episode 7. And today, Vince, as you know, we're going to be talking about 10 years after. And I want to talk about this band today, not just because they took part in Woodstock, but I'll tell you, of all the bands we've discussed so far, Vince, they're probably the band I know the least about. But I learned a lot in prepping for this today, and of course, they're a British band, and let me ask you right off the bat, do you know the story behind the band's name 10 years after?
No, I do not. So lay it on me,
okay,
bro.
well, this is interesting because Alvin Lee, who is the band's lead singer and guitarist, I guess he was a real big Elvis Presley fan, and the reason he named the band 10 years after is he formed this band 10 years after Elvis Presley, I guess, had his biggest... his first big success in his career, which was like 1956, and 10 years after it was formed in 1966. So that's kind of a little interesting because 10 years after, except for having a little bit of a blues vibe, they sound nothing like Elvis Presley to my ears.
That's right.
Yeah.
And their first album came out in 67, so the timeline fits.
Yeah.
If they start up in 66, must have gotten signed right off the bat, because to put your first album out within a year of being formed, he had either great connections or the band was that good, and the band was that good.
Yeah. And tell me, what do you remember from when you first heard of the band 10 years after?
Well, the first thing that I heard on the radio was the second song that was at the festival, Good Morning Little Schoolgirl.
Oh, wow.
Right, with that kind of lick, which sticks in your head. And now you have to understand, them being a power trio and not being commercial at all.
Yeah,
they were the least of the power trio type bands that were out there.
Yeah.
They were overshadowed a lot by Cream and Hendrix, of course.
Of course, yeah.
As they all came up together at one time. Essentially, it sure seems like that.
Yeah.
And they were more, to me, of a jam blues, heavy blues band, with experimenting. But really, the blues form stays in much of their music. So that's the first thing that I remember from them. And then the last really good commercial thing that I remember from them was "I'd Love to Change the World."
Oh, wow. Oh, yes, I've heard that song. In fact, one of the LA rock bands from the 80s, LA Guns, they actually on one of their albums, I think it's called Vicious Circle, came out in like 1994. They did a cover of that, and that was actually my introduction to that song. And then years later, I go back and listen to the original. Just an amazing song.
Oh, the original was really recorded well. And,
yeah.
And that cemented, to me, their legacy.
Yeah.
And their Woodstock performance.
And it's interesting because I want to change the world. That is, to me, one of the first real kind of, I don't know if you want to call it a protest or political song, but kind of one of those songs that kind of says it all in the title,
Exactly. I'd love to change the world, and then the second line in the lyric is, but I don't know what to do. And here we are, it's 2020, and that's just as appropriate today as it was 50 years ago.
And it's so simple because the guy, like in the lyrics, says, "I don't know what to do," but at the same time, let's stop and think. How many times have we talked doing these interviews, Vince, about how music really is a universal language, and it has a way of not just getting a message, whatever a message across is, but of bringing people together.
That's what music should be. It should be when you're in one place at one time, or if you're in the car and you're driving. And there's a gazillion people listening at the same time.
Yeah.
You're all connected at that one moment. It's really a great phenomenon.
And then in regards to 10 years after in their Woodstock performance, I mean, they really connected with all those people that were there that day. I mean, everything I've read up on the band, I mean, especially about their Woodstock performance, they said that was kind of the band's breakout American performance.
That's right. Let me give you set a little scene for you about that day.
Yeah.
That was the third day, And they did come on, it says, according to the notes on their Woodstock.com website, around 8:15, and it's true.
Yeah.
It turned out that was hours after the rain had stopped.
Yeah.
And Country Joe had already played, and it was getting darker, cooler, with radiational cooling because there were no clouds after the storm went through. So we're all wet, and for some miracle, we had all split up, and then we all met back at the at our sopping wet, muddy blankets. After the Country Joe, we just seemed to all find one another. And then we went and stood up at the crest of the top of the hill, looking down.
Wow!
And with the sun gone down, and the lights on the stage, that is the most vivid mental image that I have of them, was standing at a distance and watching them, and it was a spectacular scene. Still, some people had left, and we were readying ourselves to leave. But we listened to the set from the hill, and when they went into "I'm Going Home," then we saw a little bit of that. And then we decided, look, we're just shivering over here. Let's go. But it was a really interesting 45 minutes because they only played, 6 tunes?
I noticed that. And let me ask you, Vince, being a musician, especially a drummer yourself, were you at all attracted to this band, not just based on their great music, but also because I was reading that 10 Years After was a band known for having huge, overextended long guitar solos and drum solos. I mean, talk about the drum sound because I noticed on some of the tunes the drum sound is just as featured as the guitar parts.
Well, right. Rick Lee was his drummer from the beginning, and I think virtually all the way through until he passed in 2013. What a solid drummer. But what you're asking me, and of course, and it fit their trio. What they were trying to do, which is reinvent these blues songs by putting in these extended solos. And extended is the word. So the third song, if you look on that list, the third song, "The Hobbit," is Rick Lee's written
drum solo, basically.
He wrote that song. No lyrics. And it's similar in a sense of the Cream song "Toad," which was written by Ginger Baker, which is basically just an excuse to have an extended drum solo.
And of course, Cream and 10 Years After, of course, preceded Led Zeppelin, which I think, when you think of the song "Moby Dick," that's John Bonham's thing, and so.
Right.
But these bands came before that,
Well, that did, but they all came up at the same time. Remember, Zeppelin came out of with Page and all of that out of the Yardbirds. So that all, it's a different scene. Maybe they knew one another.
Who knows?
And Hendrix was a whole different thing altogether, coming from America to go to England to get discovered by Chas Chandler.
Wow.
But these guys, they seem to have known each other before, formed a band, voila, they're getting record deals. Okay? And that was what struck us, because we weren't really jam band. You asked me what was the question?
Because I noticed that, I read up, not only did I notice in the music, but I read up that 10 Years After was a band that was known for these long extended guitar solos and drum solos, and as a drummer I was kind of curious at the time if you picked up on how heavily the drummer was featured.
Well, he's featured quite a bit. All of them really are, but it's more Alvin Lee and Rick with the drums. Let's throw the bass. The bass kind of the bass was almost the tempo keeper in a sense, the glue. Between the three of them. Later on, they added a keyboard player, but we're just talking about this specific point in time for the most part. And we've had 7 or 8 of these conversations already.
Oh yeah, this is number 7 right here.
Right, of this, right.
Yeah.
And as you recall, a number of times I've told you I'd like structure in my songs.
Yeah, yeah.
Like songs, they lead somewhere. And for anybody listening who's a musician who's into the blues, you have to forgive me for saying this, but as a drummer playing straight blues, it's kind of boring. And this guy was trying to make it unboring.
Okay, yeah.
That's the other end of that spectrum. I get your ideas, and I appreciate your talent.
Yeah.
It's got to have a point.
Yeah.
Music should have a point. It should have a beginning, a middle, and an end. I like when it tells a story.
Yeah.
And not just some random musical journey. And sometimes their stuff feels like random musical journey.
Yeah.
Let's discuss the big one. I'm Going Home.
Oh, yeah.
All right, so I want to set this up for the listeners. According to what I read about them on this particular performance, not on this website, they had such issues. I remember I said it was cold.
Yeah.
I want to get out of there. Well, it rained. It was damp. The dampness was screwing with their tuning.
Oh, yeah.
With the guitar tuning specifically, of course. So they had trouble with that. And then they couldn't get the recordings and none of the recording stuff to record the band. And they fortunately got I'm Going Home on video, which to me, when I see it on film, in that film, it's a highlight. It really is a highlight, almost 11 minutes long.
Yeah. Check your inbox later, Vince, because I don't know if you had a chance to see it, but I sent you. I was online, and I wanted to bring that up because the simple fact, I guess that was kind of a hit, and it's kind of amazing that we were talking last week about the Grateful Dead and all the issues they had with the weather, and they didn't even know if they were going to be able to get on because first of all, their equipment was so heavy that it broke the stage. They had to repair it, and then you had the fact that the rain was. It's so damaged and, it was so wet on the stage that if they got out there and played, they would have been shocked. They're, electrocuted, and they had all these issues. And then we're talking about 10 years after, and just, again, weather-related. And who would have ever thought that, you could be playing an outdoor event, and it's so damn humid that it causes your instruments to go out of tune. I mean, have you ever, when you played an event or a gig, had anything like that, weather related, mess with the instruments or affect the show?
Always.
Yeah, you just
always, almost every single time. We as the Stones alone have played dozens of those outdoor concerts.
Yeah.
Large ones. When the weather is like a 72, moderately sunny. Not too damp, not too cold, not too hot, any of that. That you have the least amount of worries. As from a sound perspective, it's completely different than playing indoors, where you have sound coming back at you from the surrounding walls. When you play outdoors, sound just dissipates. It's out there.
See, that's interesting. I never would have guessed that. Just as a guy that goes to concert stuff, that the temperature outside, you're playing outside, affects the tuning of instruments. That's very interesting.
Oh, it's horrible for guitars.
Yeah.
Electric, acoustic, doesn't matter. It's horrible. Bass, not so bad in my memory.
Yeah.
Sure that it will affect it if it's very damp out.
Yeah.
And drums, it's comical with drums. If you get some water on the skins and you beat them, it bounces back at you.
Wow.
So, it's kind of a Blue Man Group without the colors on stage.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, and the song "Going Home" was their big hit, and it's kind of ironic that that's the one song, the big hit. I guess because they played it last, they were lucky. That they got a recording of it. They got actual video footage of it, because I understand that's the song that appeared in the film. That's right. It's the only song. Yeah. And if they felt fortunate to be able to get the one tune out of these 6. The point of where we're going backwards to the 6 was all of these songs are like 7 minutes long. Except for the last one, which was 11 minutes long. Wow. That's a real jam. Fun 11 minutes, that particular one. Because they take the form and they change it up.
He's always changing the guitar licks up in between and extending.
Yeah.
The drums just keep that shuffle beat.
Yeah.
Really fun. And the bass just keeps going. The way they did it live was just it's so much fun. I'm so glad that they caught that one for all of us for eternity. It's just wonderful.
Yeah, and you know the amazing thing is like by the time the track ends at 11 minutes and whatever, you're like, man, that's finally over. I can't believe it. But you know they and the thing people fail to realize that we're talking about back in 1969, they did not have all these cell phones. People did not take photos like they do now. They didn't even take video cameras. You weren't allowed to back in the day, and so the only footage that really exists is the official people that were filming the event, and so that one song. I mean, that's all we got, but it's something. It captured their moment in that time.
Absolutely. Another thing to remember from that day, we didn't have giant video screens.
Yeah.
So if they were 500 feet away, they were ants.
Yeah.
And hopefully the sound equipment was clear enough and strong enough to be able to fill what you were listening to. And my honest recollection of that sound system was it was great.
Yeah.
It really, really sounded better than you would think.
Yeah.
For 1969 and outdoors, and all of that. Really well done. But fraught with electrical outages and everything that we've been talking about.
Yeah,
it just did not go smoothly.
No, but see that, and that's the interesting thing because this event, it took so long to plan, and they had so many setbacks. You would think they would have had everything kind of taken, planned out, but then it just goes to prove that that old rule, like they say, anything can possibly go wrong, it will.
Oh, absolutely. Now, as an FYI, here's another thing that we didn't even have back then.
Yeah.
Printed programs.
Wow.
So let's say we didn't have, if we had a cell phone, they would kind of tweet who would come up next onto stage next, or what their planned set was, or we had nothing. And had we known that who was going to be next, we would have killed to stay, because after them was the band, and the band was one of my group of friends, one of our super favorite groups.
Wow.
Was the band, yes, and they didn't want to make it into the movie. From watching a documentary, a real recent one, from Robbie Robertson, they said it was so horrible they didn't even want to bother. They had issues on stage as well.
Yeah.
With the weather and everything, and I don't know if a couple of them had a little imbibement, but so at any rate, getting back to 10 years after, it was momentous for us to see somebody on stage that we admired, that we enjoyed, but we didn't live to buy their records or recreate their music. It's hard to recreate jam music.
Yeah, and from what I understand, 10 years, so we're talking right now 1969 as far as 10 years after at the Woodstock, festival, and then they remained together until like 1974, and then I guess in the early 1980s, Alvin Lee reformed the band because it wasn't all the original members. He decided to call it like 10 years later.
Yes, I remember that, and I believe the drummer still was with them.
Yeah.
The bass player, they added the keyboard player at that time, so I don't believe that they were any more than 4 members on stage at any one time. But each one of those guys were prolific in their own right, prolific players, and they must have been good listeners, because if anybody knows anything about jam bands, you have to listen to all the pieces around you in order to make it all fit on the fly. While it's happening, you have to listen. You can't just decide to go off in your own direction while 3 other guys are playing one thing and you're playing something. You can't do that.
And one of my all-time favorite bands that I would say is I consider a jam band is Deep Purple. And the interesting thing about Deep Purple as a band is, especially if you listen to any of the classic music like from the 70s, they were a band that were like the vocalist was almost like it was almost the vocals were very important, but like the music itself was centered around the guitar player, the keyboard player, and the drummer, and the vocals were almost secondary.
Right, Ian Pace, John Lord, Ian Pace.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, these guys are monster players. But they didn't jam so much. They created, let's say, a Highway Star.
Yeah.
That's a long song. However, they actually rehearsed that all out. That was all planned out. There was nothing left to chance in their songs, and that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and I guess
something that keeps your interest.
I guess I'd say a jam band in the sense that Deep Purple was a band. If you ever seen them live, they were very different than putting on the album in the sense that you go see Deep Purple live, you might see, like you said, Highway Star, or you might get a 20-minute jam session live as opposed to the way it is on the record,
Right. Instead of 5 minutes on a record, it's right. I get that.
Yeah.
Let's discuss one aspect of this band,
sure.
10 years after, that we haven't even addressed yet, the vocal.
Oh, okay. Very interesting, yeah.
His vocal, Alvin Lee's vocal, that raspy, that real bluesy vocal, he had a much better vocal than you would think, but set up for the blues.
Yeah,
his voice naturally lent itself to blues singing.
Yeah, and I don't know if that's why that's the kind of music he chose, that, he had a more natural voice for that, but it's interesting because when you say that they're blues-based, I definitely agree with that, but it's almost like it's blues-based with a rock tinge to it, if you know what I mean.
That's right. They call it heavy blues rock.
Yeah.
If you want to categorize it.
Yeah.
Now, the only other band that started like that was Led Zeppelin, to my knowledge, and of course there was Cream. That was a heavy blues-based band with Clapton, who's a much more lyrical player.
Yeah.
His solos, you could feel them. It wasn't just speed playing.
Yeah.
It was more would feed your soul when you hear him play. Same with the band. That band had much more of an impact on the music scene. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
Than 10 years after.
Of course.
Same thing with Hendrix.
Yeah.
These are those bands that came up during this period. Those 3- and 4-piece power bands.
Yeah.
All had a little something different, a little something similar.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Led Zeppelin was a little more hard rock tinge, but I think a lot of the Led Zeppelin fans, they don't even realize, like you said, that especially a lot of their earlier stuff was really based on the blues.
Well, this is certainly all blues based. The first song that they played, Spoonful, which I went and I listened to. I said it's got to be the same one. It is.
Yeah.
Comes from one of their early records that they've done, and that's the same Spoonful that's on Wheels of Fire.
Wow.
The Double Cream album, which came out on the market in '68, I believe. I wanted to say the late summer of '68 sometime, I believe that came out. So it's the same song, and I've seen them live on TV play that song. And this is very, comparable in one sense, except it's just not Cream.
Yeah. Now let me ask you, Vince, a lot of the guys I've talked to recently have shared, not only are they influenced by Cream, but that's kind of an album they cite by Cream. Why do you think so many people were influenced by that album?
Are you talking about Wheels of Fire?
Yeah, because I've talked to quite a few people about, what are your favorite albums or who are the bands that influenced you, and a lot of people I've talked to have kind of cited Cream and that specific album. I was just kind of curious, what do you think it is about that specific album that people point to?
That, it's an accomplishment. It was a double record. Some of it is live, and some of it is studio, half live, half studio.
Okay.
And then there was an album after that. I think it was Goodbye. So this was the next to last album. We didn't have a sense that the band was falling apart.
Yeah.
While they may have been doing some of this recording. But to me, you have to go back at least to '67, I think it is.
Yeah.
Disraeli Gears. I don't know if we've talked about that one already. Disraeli Gears has Sunshine of Your Love and many
hits,
memorable songs. To me, that's
That's the one.
That's the one. But the double album, of course, twice as much fun.
Yeah, to listen to. Yeah.
One album is studio, and I believe the other disc 2 was pretty much live.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of influence on those records.
Yeah.
There's some of the biggest songs that we've heard from them were on that recording.
Oh wow.
White Room.
Yeah. Oh wow.
Is on that record.
Yeah.
Yes, and White Room was one of their biggest commercial successes. So maybe that's what people are saying, and so that's great. But to me, it goes back just a couple of years before that, a year or two before that, with Disraeli Gears. Even the first album called Fresh Cream.
Oh wow.
Which had NYU and a bunch of those very early tunes, blues-based songs.
Yeah.
You know, not the. To me, as soon as you get into a thing with Toad, I did the whole big drum solo thing when I was 18, 19, 20, and people would enjoy it, you know. But to me, that's just filler time.
Yeah.
So when everybody and he asked me, "Oh, go ahead solo now," when I'm not doing Stones.
Yeah.
No, you. Let me just fill the pocket. I'm happy
to
doing
do that.
And do fills that maybe extended fill or a very short solo, just because you know.
Yeah. And of course, we're getting a little off topic here, but while we are on the subject of Cream, I wanted to ask you. Now, Cream was one of the first, like along with the Jimi Hendrix Experience, like you said, power trios, and Cream is a power trio. All the guys in the band, I mean, they brought something to the table. You got Ginger Baker, Jack Bruce, Eric Clapton, but I was curious, you know, when Cream split up and you've seen Eric Clapton go on to have a huge solo success that he had, were you at all surprised?
No, not at all, because you could tell that he was more of a driving force in that band. And we don't know what their background was so much. We know that he was using. But he went from that into doing Derek and the Dominoes right away with other players. I was fortunate enough to see that live.
Wow.
We had discussed that at one point. I saw that live in 1970, I believe that was. So that was
1 year after Woodstock.
71, maybe. Just shortly after they disbanded, this was out there. And then the solo stuff with Ocean Boulevard and all of those records, playing with Bonnie and Delaney and Bonnie back then as well, was part of that group, and he actually contacted the band after hearing I think it was their first or the Big Pink, he said, the first album, and flew to New York, upstate New York, to meet with these guys, and Clapton said specifically to ask them to be in the band. Wow,
amazing. You know, and Cream was such a popular band, but I almost dare say that with Cream, everybody kind of had an equal say, and I almost dare say Eric Clapton was kind of held back in a way, so everybody could kind of have their equal say, whereas when he went solo and did all these other projects afterward, he came to life, if you know what I mean.
Well, of course. And I can only think the same thing with Alvin Lee. You know, this band revolved around him. With the vocals and all of that stuff. So you got to say, a guy who is a band leader or the lead instrument guy or the lead vocalist, that becomes the identity
of the band,
of that group. And I would imagine he's the guy that started 10 years after.
Yeah, and 10 years after, we can't end the discussion without also mentioning the fact that I was reading, not only was he a guitar player and a lead singer, he also played the harp.
That's right, and he was actually really good at it.
Yeah.
They had a nice run back then, and he's left us already 7 years.
Yeah.
But a great legacy of music, and I think that's the point of all of our discussions is all of these people are leaving for posterity's sake or
well, you know what's interesting, I was reading,
they're out there.
What I was reading is his death was kind of, even though he was 68 at the time, was still kind of premature in the sense that I'm not sure what the procedure was, but he went in for like just a basic medical procedure, and as a result of that, kind of came to his death. But that it wasn't perceived that he was going to die. It's very sad.
Right. The moral of that story is if you don't have to go in and get a basic procedure, don't do it.
Same thing happened. A guy from the Bee Gees went in for a simple operation and never came back.
Oh, I know. Yeah. So sad. But we have all of this all left behind. If you start listening to it, you're there.
Yeah.
You can. It's the old thing. Do you remember where you were when you heard this song?
Yeah.
And that's the soundtrack of our lives. This is a part of it. Going home. I'm going home is certainly a part of my particular soundtrack.
You witnessed that, and you were there, and
oh my God, it was amazing.
And the interesting thing is just that one song, if you listen to it, okay, I mean the how it sounds so live and in your face, just the live recording, and even though it's all these years later, I listen to it, I feel like I was there. I mean it's so the live track is so raw and in your face.
Well, when my wife and I we take out the Woodstock movie once a year, and we play it, and that is probably our favorite video track to watch and listen to, because he's hysterical. He makes a million faces when he plays.
Wow.
There's so many fun little riffs. Oh, he's playing with this now, is he? He's turned this around, did he? And so it keeps your interest. I couldn't believe it could keep your interest for 10 and a half, 11 minutes.
And just one and we're talking just one track here, not like a couple of tracks. And it's amazing they captured that one track. It's like maybe the best performance, like you say, of what they did that day. And we got it for prosperity. And it's kind of interesting because I think Woodstock was not only their premier American breakout performance, but probably the biggest thing they'd ever done. And they went on to have success for a few years, but I think that was the most successful event they ever took part in, and that's a performance that they're remembered for 50 years later.
That's right. Just remember, back in that day we had AM, a lot of AM radio music stations which would top 40 to recycle top 40 to play the number one hit every hour on the hour. And so they didn't get much of that, if any, of that exposure. They were an FM band, an album-oriented rock, AOR, is what they used to call it, genre of a band. So you would have to be listening to Deep Cuts. And then when I'd Love to Change the World came out, that was more commercial, but still was in that FM genre than it was.
And it's kind of interesting because that's the one track I'm aware of, like that I'm familiar with. We'll say until prepping for this today, but that's like people will say, oh, that's their one hit, or their one hit wonder, but there's so much more than that. And before we end, I got to also bring up the interesting point that I went on the band's official Wikipedia, and I was reading the fact that Alvin Lee was known as the fastest guitarist in the West, obviously because of the way he played the guitar, but it was saying he played so fast. And again, it's interesting to read this because we're talking about a guy that played the blues type rock, and it said that he played so fast that not only was he known as the fastest guitarist in the West, but he played so fast that it predated what a lot of the 80s shred guys were doing in the 80s. He was like the first one to ever do that.
I couldn't agree more. And this brings the real last part. We must talk about this, or else, boy, would we be wrong to miss this. That guitar, that red guitar that he used, was his main squeeze of a guitar. He had three. That one sometimes played a Strat, sometimes he played a Martin D18 or one of those acoustics. And so that one guitar survives today with all of those stickers on it. And I happened to see from last year, doing research, one of the great blues masters of modern day, Joe Bonamassa, playing that guitar, and it was that guitar.
Yeah, Joe Bonamassa, he's a guitar legend in his own right, and he hasn't been around all that long, but he's starting to get like you said, each year he puts out a great album, and it gets a lot of PR, but I mean, one thing I dig about that guy, I mean, he can sing, he can play guitar, he can do it all, and each of his albums, they really stand out, and he puts out, he can do everything like from blues to jazz to rock and everything in between.
Yeah, he can do anything.
Yeah.
But one note about that guitar, it was custom.
Wow.
What Lee did was put in a single coil pickup amongst the other pickups that were there, and it changed the tone.
Yeah.
And so that became his signature sound, was because he added in this one single coil pickup to that guitar. So he customized it, and boy, those are the wildest stickers I've ever seen on the guitar. Very 60s to do that to your equipment, you know. But that red guitar, that cherry red Gibson ES guitar, wow.
Yeah, and let me ask you, Vince, before we wrap this up, as a guy who plays in a tribute band, are you surprised, because I can't think of one off the back, are you surprised there's not at least one single tribute band out there paying tribute to Alvin Lee in 10 years after?
No, I'm not, only because they didn't have a lot of monster hits.
Yeah.
And they kind of fit more of a genre.
Yeah.
If you were to put a tribute band of a certain
era,
heavy blues rock genre band,
you might include them.
Then they would have 3 or 4 songs in that set.
Yeah.
You know, amongst the others. But no, I'm not surprised at that. I'm not.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you know, Vince, it was very interesting talking about 10 years after, because I'd heard of him. Like many people, I wasn't a huge fan. Like you said, they didn't have a truckload of hits, but the fact that they took part in Woodstock, you know, that was their mark. That was kind of where it began, and it went on for a few more years. But, you know, they definitely had their mark, you know, at that performance. I mean, it was their breakout American performance. And like you said, there weren't a lot of people that had cameras back then. The only thing we ever get is like from the official photography people, you know, we're 51 years after the fact, and they've come out with so many great movies and books and documentaries, and who knows what's next.
And I keep looking for myself, and I could never find myself. So
yeah. I will tell you this, just in case you're interested. I seen recently on, like if you go on Amazon and even on the official Woodstock page that you and I have been referencing, which is www.woodstock.com, they got some great merchandise on there to check out. Yeah. So thanks again, Vince, for doing this. And
thank you.
Before we say goodbye, I just wanted to remind you, last time we were talking about the Grateful Dead, and you'd shared with me, okay, this time let's do 10 years after, and then next time why don't we do Joe Cocker, because you were explaining to me with Joe Cocker, you loved his performance, and how he was one of your all-time favorite artists.
Oh, he's one of the all-time greats. Miss him. I'm glad I got to see him live there.
Yeah.
That's a set we can really dig into.
Yeah, I mean, you got to see all the great performers, so yeah, I look forward to doing it next time, talking all about Joe Cocker.
He was amazing, and that's all we need to say.
Okay, well, you have a great day, Vince, and I look forward to talking to you again in the future. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.